All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Hush, little citizen, listen to me. Everything brings out the NPCs. If things you say are disapproved, thought police gonna come for you. So keep your head down, don't speak out. Don't make a single snowflake start to pout. 'Cause if that snowflake should complain, it's back to the gulag for you again. Hush, little citizen, don't say a word. Never know when you could be overheard.
Two incidents within a few days of each other have the public vigorously debating the value and validity of one of America's basic civil rights, a central pillar upholding a citizen's human right to liberty, freedom of speech, and in particular the right to express disparaging opinions, especially those that are widely offensive because they are politically incorrect. The first incident was blatantly stupid, and it's not the topic of this particular discussion. The second, also caused by stupidity, is shocking, horrifying, and tragic. Yeah, I called it stupidity. The Jewish conspiracy theory is a mess of bad logic and bigotry. It is a dehumanizing apex fallacy-based threat narrative that is virtually identical to feminism's patriarchy theory, and its proponents defend it with the same degree of emotional outrage when it is questioned. That said, the Jewish identity of the shooter's targets is not the reason that any of the victims, either the dead or the grieving, deserve compassion and respect for their ordeal. They deserve those considerations because they are human beings, subjected to a tragic nightmare in a place that was sacred to them, dedicated to love and friendship. Our hearts go out to the victims, their loved ones, and their community because of the horrific nature of what has been done to them. The horrifying nature of any mass murder is not because of who was targeted or why, but because of the senseless, deadly violence itself. And every time this happens, it terrorizes the victims, their community, and their nation. The motive, while relevant to establish intent, is morally irrelevant. It should go without saying, but every motive for murder is wrong. It's also horrifying because it reminds us that within our population the most monstrous people can go mostly unnoticed, can be, as this shooter's neighbors described him, entirely forgettable, until they go off and commit an atrocity. Then it becomes obvious in hindsight that the monster within didn't go unnoticed because there were no red flags, but because of our human tendency to turn away from disturbing behavior, to insulate ourselves from it, and to pretend it is not there. If you want relevance for the motive, it's that it demonstrates that we as a society need to change that. Disturbing behavior can be predictive, and sweeping it under the rug doesn't make it go away. And while the perpetrator is not criminally insane, and therefore can be held fully responsible for his actions, he is nuts for having decided to do what he did. While he managed to terrorize a community, he reignited a nation's passionate opposition to his own brand of bigotry. Not that it was ever going to become a popular idea, but he just increased the degree to which the views he espoused are reviled by the rest of the population. That combination of dysfunctional avoidance and present outrage has made the general public vulnerable to a very sneaky, underhanded political attack. He couldn't have created a more effective shield for that attack if he'd had doing so as his goal. Censorship proponents who have been targeting platforms with demands that they silence politically incorrect speech in general, especially dissent against identity politics, have seized on the Pittsburgh Synagogue massacre, exploiting the public's still raw horror and sympathy as a weapon. They immediately took to the internet to use their free speech rights to demand that platforms open to the public take action against everyone else's free speech rights in the name of protecting the public from having to witness anti-Semitism. Why? Because the social network Gab, upon learning that the shooter had been a user of their forum, did the opposite of other social networks. They preserved the evidence and handed it right over to the FBI. The transparency of a platform that does not censor, even to cover the asses of its administrators, made it possible to trace at least part of the perpetrator's communication history and prove his mentality and his intent. In other words, because he was not censored, we have a trail of evidence that will make him easier to prosecute and which leaves no doubt in the minds of the public regarding his motive. That trail of evidence is also highly effective fodder for appeals to emotion, because most Americans are rightfully outraged and ashamed that such a hateful, stupid motive for violence could exist here. In the height of the public's shock and grief over this terrible crime, it's easier to slip fearmongering past people's knowledge that bigotry and other hatred, irrational conspiracy theories, mass murder and genocide all long predate the internet. That for as long as there have been online forums, there have been uncensored ones, and that expressions of bigotry exist because of the speaker's underlying bigoted attitude, not the other way around. With those things not in mind, it's easy to get way too many people to accept the very same logic used by authoritarian dictators to silence political dissenters, the treatment of speech itself as a threat. Censorship proponents essentially claim that the absence of censorship on Gab is more responsible for the shooter's lucidly premeditated actions than the shooter himself is. That makes it easy for them to then slip another tactic past the radar, reversing the burden of justification when promoting limitations on a citizen's autonomous exercise of a civil right. Remember from our past discussions, we pointed out, human rights considerations define the nature and boundaries of individual human autonomy within society. The most basic iteration of this is the adage, "Your rights end where my nose begins." Civil rights considerations define the boundaries between citizen autonomy and authority, and the government's combined responsibility and authority. They are the limitations which protect citizens from oppression at the hands of government entities which would abuse authority, often under the guise of said responsibility, using it as a means by which to imply justification for infringement on the citizen's rightful autonomy. I want to restate that last bit for emphasis, but let's make it a little more personal. Your civil rights are the limitations which protect you from oppression at the hands of government entities which would abuse authority, often under the guise of responsibility, using it as a means by which to imply justification for infringement on your rightful autonomy. Why is that so important to this discussion? Because your right to free political speech, your right to openly criticize not just your government, but individual and group narratives that inform law and policies in ways that affect your lives, that political speech is being falsely pitted against the security of an identity group. Sound familiar? It should. The same political factions that stoke the fires of resentment for past misdeeds or conditions to justify tokenism, economic codependency, and attacks on due process rights in the name of all women are stoking the fear of even appearing to be anti-Semitic to justify attacks on the freedom of speech and the reputations of anyone who gets in their way. I have been personally, publicly threatened with this. Not bluntly, but in that same underhanded way, with the assertion that if I defend freedom of speech in the face of the attack on Gab, the men's rights movement itself will be labeled anti-Semitic. The implication? Get out of the angry mob's way and do nothing to stop the wrong it is about to do, or it'll take you out too. Logic has no influence with this mob. When pressed for evidence that silencing public expressions of bigotry prevents violence, censorship proponents turn to shaming tactics that should be pretty familiar to the men's human rights movement. Charges of cowardice, irascibility, fanaticism, and endangerment are lobbed in place of any real evidence or logic. In fact, sometimes flying right in the face of logic itself.
How dare you question the link between political censorship and safety? You must be one of those misogynistic, anti-Semitic, white supremacist, alt-right Jew spiritards too! If you don't agree with my suggestion that privately owned forums should have to censor speech to my specifications, you agree with every terrible thing the shooter and other anti-Semites have ever said. You're just bitter over the challenge to your own ability to say politically incorrect things. You're clearly covering your own ass.
And last but not least, as I was told on Sunday night,
you're afraid of losing your own freedom of speech.
Well, on that last note, you're goddamn right I am. My detractor clearly had no idea how much or why I value my freedom of speech. It's hard to understand that value when you're not educated enough to realize there's a common thread to how censorship has been used to protect other human rights violations throughout history, and how relational aggression, exactly like today's censorship proponents are using, factors into those abuses. The activism of the men's human rights movement is necessary because exceptions to men's basic civil rights have been carved out where feminists have said women's interests are concerned. There have been compromises made to due process rights. The right to equal treatment under the law has been butchered. Bodily autonomy? Ask any man who's been ordered by a judge to earn more money so he can meet a child support obligation based on imputed income, even when it means he has to change to a more dangerous job, work more hours, or move away from his child's residence. And where women are concerned, men's speech is so heavily policed that a man can get fired from his job because a woman overheard him talking to another man outside the workplace and didn't like her own interpretation of their conversation. Women as an identity group have been deemed so special and preferred that demands made in women's name outweigh men's constitutionally protected civil rights, their autonomy, even their children's rights to their family relationships. The only chance we have at righting that wrong is our right as a political movement to criticize these infringements and discuss reform. That right hinges on the condition that women as an identity group are not so privileged that the interests of those who claim to speak for us outweigh the citizens' right to free political speech. If we make any group that special and preferred for any reason, that will be the beginning of the end of all civil rights. A group's preferential status will become reason enough why no citizen can oppose any government action that can be associated with that group. It wouldn't matter how the group was defined, only how protected that group was, and how a particular government action could be deemed for their benefit. It wouldn't matter how much of an infringement on other citizens' civil rights they might create, either, only that it would be justified in the interests of the protected group. In fact, challenging the merits of infringing any other group's rights for the benefit of the protected group would be a condemned act, treated as evidence of prejudice or other wrongthink, and likely punished. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's been done before. It's exactly the kind of tactic used by authoritarian dictators to silence their critics, discourage civil unrest, and keep their grip on their power as they abuse their citizens. That includes the perpetrators of the atrocities that are referenced as part of the claim that opposition to anti-Semitism should be justification enough to convince you to give up your right to a platform that doesn't censor anti-feminist speech. Remember what I told you about anyone who pitches their political ideology on the claim that it's their burden to decide what is or is not good for the public because people can't take care of themselves? That person is not your friend. That person is trying to establish enough control to keep you from questioning their justification for violating your human rights. That knowledge applies here, too. A person's horrifying, reprehensible, deadly violence does not change what constitutes a human right, what constitutes a civil right, or how important it is for neither one to be compromised. No ideology actually justifies mass murder. But outrage over mass murder does not justify mass censorship either. It doesn't justify the creation of a thought police force, whether governmental or vigilante mob. Claiming it's for public protection doesn't change that. It just shows you what mask totalitarianism has chosen to wear this time around. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 58, Threat versus Narratives. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, coming to you live from the land of the free and the home of the brave, if that's what we still are. Here with that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and she who must be obeyed, Karen Straughan, to gab about the latest round of attacks on free speech. But before we do that, we've got to talk about our own speech. The social media gulag is ever expanding, which is one reason why we've diversified to multiple platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and audio-only formats, because badgers aren't that easy to get rid of. So if you want to be able to keep track of it all, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. After all, with all those non-shadow bans, you need notifications from badgerfeed.com to tell you what we're doing and when. And if you're still listening to our live streams on the main Honey Badger radio channel, please, that's old news. For live streams, the Badger Live Streams channel is where to be. And last but not least, don't forget to share and like this Honey Badger live stream and all the Honey Badger live streams so they'll be seen by other people. Think of it as a chance to thumb your nose at the establishment. So, I know Halloween is over, but we're in a creepy situation with the attacks on free speech being what they are. So let's have a conversation about being able to have a conversation. Have at it, guys.
Or I just have to say, first off, Orange Man bad.
Orange Man bad.
Of course.
And also male privilege, white privilege, white supremacy, cis heteronormative white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Beep boop.
Yeah, pretty much about sums it up.
Yeah. Like I was actually, like anti-Semitism is actually kind of on the rise, at least, in terms of when I go and I watch a video and I, go down into the comments and I see a lot of that sort of conspiracy theory stuff. And, and I always want to tell these people that don't attribute to conspiracies what can easily be attributed to human nature, right? That's just the way it is. And I have said before that because the Jewish faith and their holidays and all of their observances and everything revolves so much around the oppressor-oppressed model of things that, one day Karl Marx woke up and realized that his Jewish family, they weren't really oppressed. They were actually doing quite fine. And I think maybe he didn't know how to cram his brain into a different model of how things work. So I honestly, I have to wonder, like the whole, cultural Marxism is the creation of the Jews. Marxism is the creation of the Jews, and it's all one big Jewish conspiracy. It's the Jewy Jews. No, I don't see it that way. I see maybe that there's some cultural issues within the Jewish faith that would lead people to prioritize the conflict theory model, of society, of sociology. That would be their main model, the way they think about the world. And I think maybe when you realize that you're a billionaire who owns a massive social media platform, maybe you feel some guilt over that. Because if there's only two things to be, one is the oppressed and the other is the oppressor, then all of a sudden you have this mission inside of you, this calling to eliminate oppression, which is just never going to happen. I don't know, but like, all I know is I see all of these people who are essentially like, if you are not on board with the standard answer to the JQ, and you're not willing to say it's a conspiracy, a Jewish conspiracy, a conspiracy of international Jewry, the whole thing, everything that's wrong with society, identity politics, cultural Marxism, affirmative action, anti-white bigotry, all of it's all and yeah, you can say, well, they'll say, oh, well, you're saying the whites bought it, right? Or the the men bought it. The men bought into feminism, and the whites bought into multiculturalism. But, you know, that's like blaming the addict for the guy who's pushing meth on the street corner, right? And so it really is all the Jews' fault. And it just really is. It is a stand-in for patriarchy. It is the... And I don't know. Maybe it is something that people need. Maybe some people need an enemy, right, in order to find a sense of unity in their antagonism toward that enemy. So I don't know. It's just a very, very complicated question. All I know is I'd really like to be able to see who these people are and judge them by their own rhetoric, rather than have them be hiding in basements somewhere planning freaking more attacks over the phone instead of social media, right? Like, I'd rather have them out in the open, right? And that's whether that's Andrew Anglin and Stormfront, or whether that's the social justice warriors and their hashtag kill all white men. I'd rather they be all out in the open. So
honestly, like if I'm being honest, I never understood any of the whole Jewish conspiracy thing. Like it just seemed like such a totally random thing to me. I never got it. So the fact that everybody was jumping on this as though like this is more significant than someone going and shooting up like a church or a mosque or something like that, as though, oh my gosh, this is indicative of something like more serious because it's the Jews. It's I don't know. I feel like I'm just missing something there. But
well, number one, I don't think Jews are special victims. You know, like any hatred against any group that incites that kind of violence, you know, you should really be considering them to be quite similar, at least in terms of ethnicity and immutable characteristics, right? So if somebody goes up against Black people, you know, if it's not based on something that is that is changeable, right? Then it's not based on something that is changeable. So no matter what any given Jew does, no matter what any given Black person does, no matter what any given white man does, they can't wash themselves clean of the stain that's been thrown upon them through this kind of scapegoating, right? But scapegoating is so common. It's so unbelievably common. And usually there's a grain of truth in it. You know, and one of the things that there is a grain of truth to is that, you know, Jews are overrepresented in all kinds of high power positions in media, in entertainment, in pop culture, in writing, in politics, in professorships, in all of these areas, right? Jews are overrepresented. But the same people, the exact same people who will make the argument that Blacks aren't discriminated against in the United States in terms of criminal justice, which they are, a little bit, right? But they're like absolutely no discrimination going on because Blacks as a demographic commit more crime. And so you can't look at any kind of reasons for it other than the fact that, you know, this just happens to be the case and it's just coincidental and it doesn't have anything to do with any outside forces or systemic issues, whatever, right? They will then say, the overrepresentation of a population that has a 15-point IQ advantage over whites is just like, that's just like, no, that's all about a conspiracy, right? That's all planned, and it's all back channel deals and handshakes and people sitting around in volcanoes. These are the same people who hold up this as, you know, the overrepresentation of Jewish people in positions of power and of wealth in the 1%, right? They will say that's a conspiracy that is like completely manufactured. It's not a natural sorting of, you know, of cream to the top and, you know, and the whole bit, right? That has nothing to do with it. It's not about ability. It's not about talent. It's all about this conspiracy between the Jews, right? At the same time, they'll make the same argument that we do, that, you know, men and women earn different amounts of money because of personal choices and differences in talent and differences in distribution of talent, right? So, I mean, like, I'm seeing these people making these arguments that at least a significant proportion of the differences between races and, you know, in their outcomes, the differences between the sexes and their outcomes, right? All of these are largely based on just innate differences between groups in aggregate on average, right? But this overrepresentation of Jewish people in these upper tier positions is some kind of horrible conspiracy. It literally is, you know, that it almost sounds like they're saying that the Jews all get together once a year in a hollowed out volcano and sit around a conference table and decide how to fuck over everybody else today. And I'm sure there are some Jews who do that, just like I'm sure there are some whites who do that, and I'm sure that there are people like Louis Farrakhan out there who are like, how can we fuck over these people, right? But I don't see it as some kind of intrinsic thing to Judaism or to the Jewish ethnicity that they would want that or be part of that. And you can see it in the ways that that you have high achieving Jews writing things like Mises and Milton Friedman, you know, going hardcore libertarian, privatize the roads, you know, and all of that stuff. And then you have the others who are in the universities who are promoting communism, right? Like, it's not like there's some kind of agreement between all Jews, right?
I wonder how underrepresented Jews are in American football, professional American football.
Pretty sure basketball as well.
Yeah,
if it's competitive nerd stuff, I'm sure they're overrepresented, but anything physical, you'll probably see them underrepresented.
At least in the United States. The idea of a conspiracy, just, if your first response to an anomaly is conspiracy rather than let's look into this and see what reasons could be behind this happening, then you're not thinking rationally. You know, you're just taking shortcuts, and it doesn't really make the situation better, and it really kind of distracts from the ability to seek solutions to modern problems. So we have a situation now where people are coming out with this conspiracy theory, and they're basically bonding over it, and they get mad if you don't bond with them over it. Like, I've had, and at least on Twitter, I actually didn't interact at all with Jewish conspiracy theorists. You know, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. I didn't actually interact a lot with them on Gab. I had more interaction with them on Twitter. And if you question it, they have the same pattern of evidence denial, and sending you to websites that are full of crap, and getting emotional over your challenges to the conspiracy theory that feminists do when you challenge patriarchy theory. And it's like you just screwed with somebody's victim narrative, and you can't screw with the victim narrative, because if you screw with the victim narrative, then people get upset. You can't really talk about what to do about particular issues, legal issues, men's rights issues, issues of poverty, issues of how do we deal with, how do we have a balance between keeping wages fair and keeping workers fed, and things like that. You can't talk about those things without these conspiracy theories coming up, and people, instead of dealing with what the actual causes are behind these issues, the fact that there's been activism that has led to unequal treatment under law and policy, and those laws could be reformed. The fact that there's some social attitudes that are pretty much common to almost everybody, that just people need to be more educated, and these issues need to be discussed, and it needs to be pointed out and considered, that men are human, and if something's a human right, it's a men's right too. Those are things that we should be able to discuss without having somebody come along and go, "A conspiracy!" But right now, we have various groups that rely on their victim narratives and their conspiracy theories for their self-image, basically. And if they have those challenged, it's like telling them that they're not the person they thought they were, and they're not the good person they thought they were. That you had to use the other as a foil, a bad guy, to promote themselves.
Well, I mean, I see a lot of similarity between the sort of the feminist narrative regarding patriarchy, the Black Lives Matter narrative regarding racist cops, and this sort of Jewish question conspiracy. Yes, of course they done did it. And it really is like you can't point to a whole lot of laws that favor Jews over everybody else, right? Like the way that you can when it comes to laws that favor women over, men, or policies, or actual. You can't really point to a lot of that in the Western world. Just like you can't point to laws favoring whites over everybody else in the Western world. So I think essentially what we're looking at is, once I see the changes that I want to see in terms of things like due process for everyone, including men, being respected, the rights of everyone, including men, being respected, that no one is privileged over men, that the Canadian government will maybe one day have to stop posting jobs and saying white men need not apply, those kinds of things, because we're worse than the United States in terms of that kind of stuff. We can openly discriminate against white men because our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not preclude it. So essentially once we have actual equality under the law, I'll put up my feet and I'll be like, okay, well, now I'm just going to go and write my memoirs and make a killing doing that, and go on speaking tours talking about what it was like being a men's rights activist. That'd be great. Because, I'm seeing on ink and paper, right, what's going on here. And I'm not having to make any inferences about backroom deals, and I don't have to have my my investigation board with the little tacks and the strings linking everything together. I don't have to. No, I just have to look at what I just have to look at what is written into law and policy, and I also just have to look at what second wave and third wave feminists say. Right? They're not hiding what they're doing. Right? They're not hiding what their intentions are. When Catherine McKinnon said, women will not be liberated until the nuclear family is destroyed, and that feminism is socialism and communism writ large across gender, right? She wasn't hiding anything. Those were public statements that she made, right? So, I mean, it's like, but yet somehow I'm supposed to infer that, people are making these grand plans behind closed doors and implementing them with this long-term agenda and all of this stuff without any actual concrete evidence that this is something other than just maybe a few Jewish people who say ridiculous things and don't necessarily have the support of their community. right? It's like, it's very, very bizarre. It's a very, very strange thing that I would have to infer the motivations. I would have to problematize every statement made by a Jewish person, you know, and essentially subject it to the I guess the critical theory treatment or the feminist philosophy treatment.
It becomes it kind of becomes a challenge to if you're already dealing with issues like this, you know, dealing with political issues and talking about social patterns and things like we've been discussing, and then you look at the writing on these conspiracy theories, it's a challenge to read it without getting a headache. I'm very fortunate that I don't feel pain most of the time when I get headaches. I just get head pressure. It feels like somebody's trying to push my head forward from the back, you know. But so I can read this stuff, and it makes me tired eventually. But it's like, geez, you know, some of the stuff that you end up digging through, trying to deal with these issues, it can be very exhausting to deal with the crazy. What it kind of communicates to me is when people feel helpless and powerless, they have to have a devil, I guess you could say. And I think a lot of people, we're getting more and more people who are non-religious, and they have to have a devil. And so they can't have a spiritual devil. They can't have a supernatural devil, because they don't believe in the supernatural and they don't believe in the spiritual, so they got to have human devils. And they pick a group, and that's their human devils. And then it's a lot easier also for people to believe that there is an entity out there that is the man keeping you down, than it is to believe that if you change what you're doing, and maybe even change what you value in life, you might have more success and you might be happier. So you get a lot of people, I think, just from what I've noticed in any case, you get a lot of people, this is across all of these conspiracy theories, these persecution conspiracy theories. A lot of people seem to, they just seem desperate to hold on to the idea that anything bad that's happening in the world is somebody else's fault. And anything they can't do anything about, there has to be a conspiracy behind it. Anything they can't change in their own lives, they have to be able to attribute to another group of human beings. And it really is, it seems to me, a function of learned helplessness. I don't know if that makes sense.
You kind of see that sort of behavior even like just in individuals that are really struggling with various things in their lives. It's like it's easier to believe that this is somebody else's fault than it is to believe that this is my fault, or that there's something that I could have done differently, or that my choices maybe weren't the best things. I mean, it's always easier, I find, for people who are struggling to want to believe it's based on something external to them, because, you know, facing that there are some things about yourself that you might need to change, that can be very difficult for a lot of people. Now, it's not true for everybody, but for a lot of people, and like I deal with a lot of people on a regular basis who are very much demonstrating this mindset, it's the case. It's easier to put it outside you than to look within.
Yeah, and I noticed that sort of also leads to the other end of the spectrum, where you have people who feel wounded by the fact that there are people who have different ideas than they do. Not just, disagreeing with those ideas. Like, I very, very strongly disagree with nearly everything about feminism. I very strongly disagree with feminism's entire victim narrative. Very strongly disagree with feminism's set of stated problems and their proposed solutions to those problems. Very strongly disagree with all those things, but I don't feel like I don't feel like there's nothing I can do about it. Well, there is an overt pattern of behavior and an overt, you can call it a conspiracy. It's a political movement. It's not a behind closed doors, nobody knows what's going on, nobody could see what's going on kind of thing. Like Karen said, it's right out in the open. And it's ideas that I think are bad ideas that can be challenged. And this is something that, I don't feel wounded by feminism's ideas. I feel compelled to challenge them because I think they're wrong. And that's a huge difference between the social justice, NPC, Marxist, statist, whatever you want to call them, the authoritarian, regressive end, and it's not just the left, both the left and the right, the authoritarian, regressive end of these groups that feel like they have to control what other people can say because they're afraid to confront ideas that they disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of see that a lot in general in the way that people behave, say, on social media, as an example that a lot of people will be familiar with. Like, I'm sure that if anybody still uses Facebook, which I know, whatever, but if anybody still uses Facebook, you see these posts from time to time where it's like, if you believe X thing or if you don't believe Y thing, just go ahead and remove me from your friends list, because you are literally not allowed to be my friend if you have this view that I don't have.
And you're not invited to my birthday party.
Exactly. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah,
they're not even interested in your reasoning behind it. Like you could say, I don't like this because it doesn't align with my experiences at all. So what's the problem with that? They don't care. They're like, no, just get out of here. I don't even want to hear it because this is something that is like a part of my soul now. And you're basically crushing that part of my soul if you disagree with it.
Yeah, you can even say something like, I don't believe in welfare because I think it actually ultimately harms the people it's trying to help, right? And so out of compassion, out of basic human compassion, I don't like welfare, right? You can say that, right? And they'll say, you just hate poor people and want them all to die.
Yeah.
Yep. And then on Twitter, they do it a little differently. On Twitter, it's, I used to respect you, but then you disagreed with me, and now I don't.
Oh, God.
God, that one drives me nuts. I'm like, yeah, that means you don't understand what respect actually is.
Yeah. Do you know what how many of those comments I got on the videos that I did criticizing internet blood sports and JF Garia P?
Oh, I buy it.
And even the JF one was just like, it was a goofy response video to a goofy video that I don't even know if he was joking. Like, I hope he was joking when he made that video, but I hope he was just kind of trying to be a po. But I got so many, I used to respect you, but now I see you for what you are, unsubbed, like times like 100,000.
Yeah.
And I was
never
like,
subscribed to you to begin with.
and I was just like, oh, I see all these comments saying people are unsubbing, and yet I'm looking at my stats and nobody's really unsubbing.
Yeah,
right? I've lost 500. I've lost 500 subscribers out of my 184,000. Oh no.
You're ruined now, Karen. You just
and did it wind up going up eventually after that?
Oh yeah, anyway? No, I'm over 100, over 200,000 now. So.
Yeah. Oh no.
So that means you're way over 9,000.
Yeah. I'm sure you're just so devastated by the loss.
Yeah, no, it's like, and it's like, okay, so whatever. Are like, if you're the guy who keeps following me around, poking me with the word money badgers, then I'm happy to see you unsubscribe. That's great.
Yeah.
So
they keep giving you views.
I know.
Showed up to tell you how much they don't respect you anymore. But here, have some views to your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Jeez,
it's fine.
Hilarious. I'm going to go ahead and catch up on the super chats here, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the whole, don't talk end of this, because I think that's really insidious. And it's not so much a conspiracy as it is a cacophony of various groups that are panicking. But first, we can go on with the super chats. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, the best argument against Marxism as a conspiracy theory from the Jews, Ludwig von Mises and Rand Murray in Rothbard. There goes my dyslexia. That pulled all the way across the page. All Jewish, all free market. And then Frank Tomeo gave us $2 Canadian, said, I agree, keep the nutcases where we can see them. And that's a big one for me. One of the unique things with this specific incident is that Gab didn't delete things before law enforcement got a chance to respond to them. And Facebook deletes. Facebook gets rid of stuff when there's an incident like this. Twitter, when they find it, they get rid of it. Sometimes they get rid of it before an incident. They didn't with the pipe bomber. They left hundreds of messages, threatening messages up. But quite frequently, a lot of social media, when they get somebody that acts this way, you don't find out. Law enforcement doesn't find out because the material gets deleted. We have evidence this time, and this guy's going down. He's basically everything that's needed to prove his attitude, his motive, what he was thinking and what he was planning. It's all there. So he's not going to be able to argue. He can't even argue insanity because he planned it ahead. And the difference between, like, he may be nuts, but he's not criminally insane. The difference between being insane and being criminally insane is culpability based, and it's based on you being able to tell that what you did was wrong. If you can tell that what you did was wrong, then you're not criminally insane. The law. Or against the law, right? Yeah. Then you're not criminally insane. And the evidence for that is if you didn't try to, if you didn't try to get away with it, if you didn't expect any repercussions, basically, if you didn't do anything to mitigate the consequences of the action, then yeah, you can be considered criminally insane. But if you took measures like this guy did, he saved bullets to try to get an escape, and the other end of it is if you are in the moment, if you snap, and pre-planning demonstrates that he didn't snap. He went in, is what he said. I'm going in, so that's premeditation. So they've got premeditation and they've got an escape plan from him. They know he's not criminally insane. He's culpable 100% for what he did. Even if his ideation was flat out crazy. So I would rather keep the nutcases, like Frank Tomeo says, where we can see them, and where we can, if we see somebody making threats or demonstrating that they're planning to do something like this, alert law enforcement and hopefully stop it from happening. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I think this is Syriata Florad, but hopefully I didn't butcher that. Gave us $5 and said, if the whites bought into multiculturalism, why is cultural appropriation a problem now? Sounds a bit redundant. Cultural appropriation isn't a problem now. Cultural appropriation gets called a problem because calling cultural appropriation a problem makes it easier to control people. And everybody wants a little more control over their social circles than they actually have. So it's easy to sell it to, especially like college-age students and stuff like that. It allows them to interact with each other in a way that they feel a little more powerful as part of their social circle because they can throw accusations like that around. But it's not.
Yeah. Anybody remember Anybody remember that teaching assistant who assaulted the white guy with dreadlocks?
Who
at
turned out
university?
to be Egyptian.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No.
And it's like, you got our hair, you're not allowed to have our hair, and you're appropriating my culture, and I'm just like, oh my fucking God. Like, what a retarded thing. You know, the whole thing with Halloween costumes and everything, I have to hand it to Beauty and the Beta, Matt Christensen, and Beauty in the Belly of the Beast, who do a podcast on YouTube for doing their Halloween show. She was in full Cherokee regalia, pretending to be Elizabeth Warren, and he was Elizabeth Warren's great grandfather, who happens to be Cherokee, and so he was in full regalia as well. Those are the costumes that they chose. Because it's absolutely, and that kind of thing should be mocked. And I don't understand how Elizabeth Warren hasn't been accused of cultural appropriation by these lefties, considering she's less Native American than the average American. The average white American is more Native American than her.
Yeah. It's
So
real cultural appropriation is rare like that. Real cultural appropriation is what's her name? The lady that
Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah, Dolezal. That's real cultural appropriation.
Sean King.
Oh my
And
God.
Sean King, you know.
Those people, it's so
But
embarrassing.
somehow that's okay, right? Like that's okay to do.
And you know what's funny is if you actually go to someplace like Japan, and they see that you are embracing aspects of their culture, you know, certain anime, even if you only know the English subtitled version, or you know, you happen to like particular types of food that you can name, that you know, you can order
And they're
them
like,
in restaurants by
wow,
name.
this is great.
Yeah, they're like, we have something in common. This is and very, very social. But in the United States, if you enjoy those things in front of the wrong white person, you get accused of culturally appropriating the Japanese.
God.
Like, I was in Japan. It's been a long time. I really would love to be there again, but, you know, money and time. But it's nothing like white college students portray it as. You know, when you enjoy a part of their culture. And I think a lot of places are like that. The phrase "when in Rome, do as the Romans do" didn't come from, you know, just the idea of obeying another country's laws and keeping out of trouble. It was that you immerse yourself in the local culture
and the customs and the food and
we all learn things from each other.
Yeah, you know, like if I were to go and visit a Sikh temple that didn't have chairs in the dining hall, I would sit on the floor like everybody else, right? Like I was telling you earlier, you know, when I went to a Shabbos dinner with a bunch of Orthodox Jews, I kept my elbows covered, and drank like all of the other Jews there, which was a lot. But it was like you embrace where you are, and try to fit in as best you can.
You know, I've done that as well. The university I went to was in a small community, and there were a whole bunch of churches in the community, and the music department had sort of interacted with the churches so that when voice students had their you know, they had a thing they had to do where they had to perform once in public, and the churches asked them to come and sing, you know. So you'd have a student that was a voice student would have to do their performance. They would pick a church and ask if they could sing at one of the services. And one of my friends went to one of the Mennonite churches in the area, and you know, a bunch of us went, and I was the only one with really long hair, and I put it in a bun and covered it up. And they, my friends were all like, "Oh, you can't do that. You're not Mennonite." And I didn't put it in a little hat thingy like they wear. I just put a
wimple
kerchief over it. Yeah, I didn't have one of those, but I just put a little white scarf over it, a little white handkerchief over it. And actually, some of the ladies were like, especially when they found out how long my hair was, they were like, "Thank you, that was very respectful." And it was like all my friends were afraid that they were going to be offended that I was mocking them. And I was like, "No, I'm not going. You go in there with your hair out when it's hair like mine, in their particular belief system, you're showing a little too much skin." So I was trying to be modest. We all wore long dresses. We all wore, we didn't wear low cut anything. We didn't wear short sleeves. And we didn't do anything disrespectful to go in there. And you do that when you're dealing with other cultures. But it's not mocking another culture to show that you recognize the differences in addition to the commonalities between your culture and theirs. It's respect.
I thought that was supposed to be the respectful thing to do. You kind of learn what to do and not do based on the way they do things in their culture.
I know, and which makes Justin Trudeau's gaffe, on his visit to India so bizarre. Yeah. Because I'm literally listening to CBC radio, which is like our super left-leaning excuse for BBC. It's our national broadcaster, public broadcaster, and it is so left. It's just unbelievable. Some of their show's idea of a balanced panel on a women's issue is two feminists and a neutral. So I mean, like they're just absolutely ridiculously to the left and to the social justice and progressive side of things. Right. But I'm listening to this Indian journalist being interviewed by, oh God, I forget what the show was. And he said, so he comes out of the airplane and he's dressed in an outfit that we would reserve for a wealthy person's wedding 200 years ago. And here I am wearing Skechers.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what he's doing, right? But he was essentially putting on a costume that nobody wears. It's a traditional 200-year-old wedding costume that he wore to get off the plane and do his press conference and his meetings with Indian dignitaries. And all of the Indians seem to be like completely blown away and perplexed by this, right? They were just like, what the hell is he doing?
Has he visited Germany?
Has he lost his fucking mind? Is he going to wear
Did he wear lederhosen?
Oh, yeah. Boy. Oh, I know. It's like, it's ridiculous. Like, that would be what it would be. Or like he'd wear a helmet with oxnards when he's visiting Denmark.
Oh, God.
Right? Like absolutely retarded. But he gets away with it because I've always considered myself a feminist and my mother raised me to be a proud feminist. His bipolar mother who freaking went and banged the Rolling Stones and disappeared for 2 weeks on a bender and left her husband in the prime minister's office trying to explain to the press that no, she's not actually missing, but I don't know where she is. Yeah, she taught him how to be a feminist. Yeah.
Well, that's about how you learn how to be a feminist.
There you go.
But next one we have Master Rogue gave us $2 and said, Prim! Hug, heart. I can't tell what that is. I think that's a smiley face. Still no job yet.
Oh, well, hope you find one soon.
Yep, we'll all be hoping that.
Yeah.
And hopefully in this economy you should be able to. Just keep looking and don't give up. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, blaming the drug pushers for addictions is like blaming adverts for people buying stuff. People have agency, guys, but spoons made me fat. Frank Tomeo gave us $2 Canadian and said, Canada screws us all. Hi, ladies. I had to read it like that.
We
I gotta go back to the drug thing though. The one caveat that I will say is that when you buy street drugs, you don't know what strength you're getting, and you don't know what's in it. And I think a lot of people are really ignorant of that. For instance, I think a lot of people who use heroin and die from fentanyl don't expect to get fentanyl in their heroin. So there is that. And then the other end of it is if the medical community is careless with how they handle opioids, and then they turn around and blame the patients, that's also not good. But at the end of it, you're still dealing with a substance, and you're still dealing with a behavior, and you're in control of your own behavior, and you simply have to, try to figure out what to do about it. And generally speaking, you know when you need help.
There are things that like Scott Adams' stepson just recently died of fentanyl overdose, and Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, and he said that his stepson he was found dead wearing a fentanyl patch. But the night before, he had said he was going to go out and try and score some Xanax. Well, on the street, Xanax is often not Xanax. It's a cocktail of drugs that mimic the properties of Xanax, one of which is fentanyl. Often, right? So he essentially was purchasing one thing and received another, and essentially got a double dose. Twice the dose of fentanyl, and died as a result. So I mean, like there are things where I would think that, like when you say advertising, I would say that there has to be some responsibility placed on advertisers to be honest about their product, to be honest about the ingredients, to be honest about what it can do. Those things actually have to exist before you place all of the blame on the consumer, right? If I buy a product that's labeled B complex vitamins, and all it is cat litter and old
Sawdust.
Chinese newspapers, shredded up and pressed into capsules, and I end up with toxoplasmosis, and my baby gets born deformed because of that, because these pills I thought were vitamins contained cat litter. I think that the advertiser of the product and the maker of the product should be held responsible for that.
Yeah, I feel that way about the flushable products, where you see flushable on all this stuff that's not toilet paper. If it's not toilet paper, it's not flushable. Even
if it's Kleenex.
Kleenex.
If it's Kleenex and toilet paper.
But I wouldn't even flush Kleenex down the toilet. But and they have these flushable wipes, and they have sanitary napkins that say flushable applicator. None of that stuff, like, it'll go down the toilet if you flush it, but it won't dissolve. And you find out later on that some guy has to dive through 80 feet of raw sewage and feel around with his bare hands to grab that stuff in a tank,
peel it off the grate,
so that the sewage could be processed. And and that's in the United States. In India, they've got men doing the same thing, young men doing the same thing, cleaning this stuff out of tanks, and they're dying from methane poisoning and stuff like that. And I think those companies should be held responsible. I think the utilities that have to employ men to do these jobs, I think they should have the recourse to turn around and sue companies that advertise products as flushable when they're not. But that's it's accountability. I mean, you gotta send some guy into a situation like that because this company said flushable when their product does not dissolve in the sewer system the way that they think it does. That's accountability. So false advertising versus regular honest advertising makes a difference, and it's the same thing with drugs, and it's the same thing with ideology. And this is I have a post that I periodically toss into arguments with feminists, and it pisses them off every time, but it's how a hate movement exploits its useful idiots. Basically, it's not the way it's titled, but a lot of academic feminism that's directed at students coming in from American schools where they've had a lot more indoctrination than they have training in logic, reasoning, and literacy. So they come into these schools and they go and they take classes that have gender studies inserted into them, it's in whole areas. Business administration has gender studies inserted into it. Psychology is riddled with it. All areas of medicine have. All areas of law. It's not just
education.
Courses. Education is just, it's completely taken over education.
Social work.
Yep, all of that stuff. And they're not equipped to question it. A lot of them are not equipped to question it, and it is very much like being told that you are getting an education in one thing and being indoctrinated with something else instead. It's basically a bait and switch. And so I see that with that, and I don't necessarily think that excuse works for necessarily the Jewish conspiracy theory, but there is a degree to which people who adopt irrational ideas like that they have been sometimes very highly manipulated. I think Louis Farrakhan could be, or is it Louis Farrakhan? Louis Farrakhan could be said to be doing the same thing, but in church instead of in a school. So I gotta say the drug thing and the advertising thing's not as cut and dried as you would think. Should it be regulated? No. But should we be aware of it? Absolutely. And we do need a more savvy class of consumers all around. Education, advertising, church, everything. To where we figure out, hey, just because somebody is in a position of maybe academic authority or religious authority or whatever, and they said this thing, that doesn't mean I should buy it. And we have Frank Tomeo gave us US $2 and said, did HBR get anemic royalties email today? I do not know the answer to that. Because I saw in the chat that he sent something to topic@badgerpod.com, and I'm not the one that answers those emails. So you have to get a hold. I think Alison actually reads
Alison
that.
is.
Yeah.
Then we have Exploding Prinny. Gosh, the whole page just jumped up. Exploding Prinny gave us $5 and said, the white nationeer say the Jewish people want to destroy civilization, but it's also the civilization that they are doing well in. What's the end game? Well, that's a good question. I think you mean white nationalists, because that's
no. But the accusation is that the Jews want to bring down Western white society through imposed multiculturalism and other things, and yet it is the Western societies in which the Jews are. And you could
thriving.
Ask most Jews, right, Gadsad and others, right, that this is the place where they're safe and thriving, right? So why would they? What is the end game? Why are they trying to destroy the lovely home that they're in right now, and essentially turn it into, according to the people who theorize about this and the Jews' role in this. Want to turn it into essentially a replica of the Middle East, and full of Muslims and Sharia law and fundamentalist Islamists and and all of that stuff, right? Why would they want to invite that into the place where they're, even if they don't own the home, they're renting it and it's really nice. Why are they inviting it in? Right.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because they would end up getting killed in that situation.
Yeah, honestly, I have to wonder if maybe it is that sort of idea that, they grew up all their lives hearing the stories about how the Jews, escaped oppression. They escaped oppression. They've been oppressed through like four millennia, right? And oppressed by these people, oppressed by those people, and they overcame that or escaped it or something, and all of their observances are based on this sort of oppressor-oppressed model. And then they woke up one day and realized, I'm a billionaire who owns Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm not oppressed, but there's only two classes of people here, the oppressors and the oppressed, so I must be the oppressor, and maybe I feel guilty about that. I don't know. Maybe it's Jewish guilt. Maybe it's a corollary to white guilt.
That would make you question your identity, if your identity was all wrapped up in being oppressed, and all of a sudden you realize you're a billionaire. Which, I mean...
or not, maybe not a billionaire, but you're like, you're high, you're in the C-suite of, CNN's offices, or the New York Times, or you're on the board of directors somewhere, or you're a professor, a highly respected professor in some university, or
simply not oppressed.
You're a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant who lives in a great house, and you're in an upper middle class neighborhood, and you see that there's still suffering in the world, and there are now people who are beneath you, when your entire religion and religious tradition is based on focusing on how you have been considered beneath everybody else. Maybe there's some guilt attached to that, and maybe maybe it's a pathology. Like there is some evidence that Jews are more susceptible to certain neurological conditions and certain forms of neuroticism, and so maybe it's just a natural consequence of being indoctrinated since you were a child, as the person who is oppressed, and then waking up one day and realizing that that's not who you are. But what other role is there for you, and do you really want to inhabit that role? Or would you rather destroy the entire system that puts you there?
Actually, Mark Levin had a guest on his show, and I can't think of which author it was, but who has written about this, who has basically said the same thing about the black population in modern America, that they can't get out of the pre-civil rights mentality, where their population was very much discriminated against and very much downtrodden, and they were oppressed. And there are problems still today that our society has. There are definitely still areas that we need to work out as a society. And so it's not like it's all over. But the oppression of the 1930s and the oppression of the 1950s of minorities, it's not present in 2018. But they don't necessarily know how to relate to a society that isn't doing that to them. So the way he basically put it is they react to any adversity as if it is that, because they don't have another means.
They don't have another model.
Right, yeah. They don't have another model for it. And it's going to probably take a generation of growing pains to get through that. And what Candace Owens has been talking about, what she label it, Blexit, or something like that. It's like Blexit. There you go, Blexit.
Yes.
That is sort of the beginning of that. This idea of we don't have to be victims. We could be successful, and we can be happy about being successful. We don't have to be guilty about being successful. And
well, I
like what she's doing now, and I think it's interesting. She had come out of the woodwork early on, and kind of as Gamergate's first round was winding down, and she came out with some ideas that were really not good. She was going to start a doxing platform and everything to deal with bullying online. And, of course, she heard from both sides all of the reasons why that was a bad idea. And she sort of disappeared. When she came back, she wasn't advocating that idea anymore. She had other ideas. And a lot of us were like, well, what's, is this a con artist and everything? No, I think she tries things out, and when she gets feedback, she listens to it and considers it and makes her decisions and changes her mind. And the way she apologized to Kanye West for misrepresenting him, that took balls, because that was very public, and she was very humble about it, and very honest about what led to her faux pas there, her misrepresentation, and how responsible she was for paying attention to those things and not letting that happen, and that she had failed in that responsibility. So I think she's definitely demonstrating some integrity there, and I kind of like that. But in any case, yeah, that whole situation, it's very similar, and you see the same thing, with the white guilt narrative has the same issue. You've got this idea that if you are doing better than other people in your situation, you've done something to somebody. Because even among whites, there have always been more people who did not have a high degree of success than there have been people who did have a high degree of success. And you get people that come from stock that didn't have a high degree of success, and they become successful. Their first response is going to be, oh gosh, now I'm on the other side, I'm one of the bad guys.
Gee, it's almost like it's nothing to do with external factors like skin color or things like that, but maybe some other things like economic benefits or things like that. It's almost like we shouldn't be judging people based on those things.
Well, yeah, and I think like we run the risk of actually, sort of saying or implying, I guess, that sexism doesn't exist, that racism doesn't exist, that there are no biases. We run the risk of saying that, every Jewish person who made their way into a C-suite at some major corporation got there solely on his own merits, and there was no nepotism involved. There was no familial connections or anything like that. Nobody made phone calls and essentially said, well, your son's marrying my daughter, but I have this person that I think you should, I mean, we all know that nepotism exists. We all know that cronyism exists. We all know sexism and even racism are still realities, right?
Also,
I mean,
you're going to trust the advice of people closest to you rather than people you don't know.
That's
so
right.
There's that degree of, it's not overt nepotism, it's sort of accidental nepotism.
Yeah, no, it's the reason my boyfriend has a job. Right. It's the reason my boyfriend has a job is because he was complaining to a friend of his from university. Do I have to put "will suck your dick" for a job at the top of my resume? Do I have to do that? Because it's been 9 months of cold calling and no bites. And, he has very good credentials. Right. I mean, he was published in a major journal in his second year of undergrad. So, I mean, this is not a guy who. It's just nobody knows who he is, right? And his friend, without being asked, made a phone call for him, and then the next Sunday of a long weekend, he has a 20-minute phone conversation with somebody who called him, and all of a sudden he's got a job, and a good job.
Yeah, but Prim is right. It's a shame we have to clarify that, but the fact is that people look at a lot of things in black and white, and this is one of them.
Yes, very much.
The whole
so.
situation is really complicated, and we, none of us are saying that nepotism and cronyism don't exist. None of us are saying that racism and sexism, particularly sexism, of course we wouldn't say sexism doesn't exist.
Right. And we're not
but
saying they're okay either, but they are
That's
right.
naturally occurring things.
yeah, I mean, like the way I would say that patriarchy, the way I put it to Michael Kimmel in that question and answer session after the Red Pill premiere in New York, the way I put it to him was patriarchy was an emergent property of biology and the environment.
Yeah.
It was just the least worst system that got the best results for everybody. If we lived like bonobos back in the days before birth control and hot and cold running water and sewer systems and all of that stuff, and if we'd lived like bonobos back then, we would be bonobos.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Well, and
We
and
would
of
not
course,
we would not be people with like buildings and electricity and universities and the ability to contemplate, the big questions. No, we'd be bonobos.
and this is where the damage of censorship comes in. It's where the damage of conspiracy theories come in as well. Feminism's patriarchal conspiracy theory, combined with the social censorship of you're not allowed to contradict feminists or you're a misogynist, has set society back in terms of evolving naturally and normally out of that system. And there are, I think, aspects of it that have continued into the 21st century that wouldn't have if we hadn't had feminist activism. I don't think we would be so far behind on equal recognition of parental value to the child between both sexes.
Oh, God, yeah.
I don't think we would be as far behind on understanding how the differences and similarities in how men and women work, and the ability for employers to take advantage, and to the advantage of the worker, of both of those factors, both the differences and the similarities. I think that we have instead ended up in sort of a stagnation in both of those areas, specifically because of feminism's hindering the conversation and applying a needless, valueless, damaging conspiracy theory to those issues. But I'm going to go on with more super chats. Frank Tomeo gave us $2 Canadian and said, CBC is painful arse cancer. Because is there a non-painful kind? I haven't experienced that yet. Hopefully I won't. It's kind of rampant in my family, so it could happen. But and I do deal with feminists, but I don't smoke. And that seems to be the factor, so I probably won't. French Honey Badger gave us US $2 and said the BBC is a sad excuse for a television channel. And I don't know. I mean, I don't watch much TV because I feel that way about most of what's on television, period.
Basically, these days.
I think there's still weather sometimes on the Weather Channel.
Yeah, but you can just go to theweathernetwork.com, though.
I need to retitle the History Channel the Conspiracy Theory Channel, because every time I flip through the television at work to find something to listen to while I'm working, and I used to, like, with high hopes, go to the History Channel looking for some history, something on actual history, and 9 times out of 10 it's the Ancient Alien guys. And, I don't I don't hate them or anything, but I really don't care about their show, and I don't want to listen to it, and it's not history. But anyway, Hannah TV rant over. Television, Jeremy, it's television. It's the idiot box. Independent Corax gave us $5 and said, just saying, love you all. Thanks for all the help. As men, we have to talk softly, but have a energetic honey badger. Is that like talk softly and carry a big stick?
Hopefully it won't be like that forever.
I think we're all glad to do this. We're all sorry that that it has to be us. I hate that people don't listen to the things I say when men say them. And there isn't very much I say that hasn't been said by men first.
Right.
It's not like these ideas are original. I try to frame them in the best understandable, most easily understandable way. I try to get all the facts out, and I try to make the logic very plain and clear. But it's still all stuff that male MRAs have been talking about for years. And it does kind of make me sad that people don't hear it until a woman speaks up and says something. Or if they hear it from a man, they have all kinds of excuses not to consider it, and instead they emotionally respond.
But God damn it, if we have to stand up in order to get shit done,
then we will.
I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah, and there's certainly not going to knock us down, and we're happy to be able to do it. It's just that's one of the things that does stick in my craw. I'm very happy to be able to do this, but it really sticks in my craw that it takes, that my gender has to be the reason why people listen to me. I want people to like me for my brain, damn it. But and then French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, there's a difference between advertiser fraud and advertiser forcing to buy their stuff. I was arguing against the latter, not the former. And that makes sense. Then there is a difference. There's that difference, I would say, would be like the difference between an insurance company telling you that they cover things they don't cover versus the Democrats putting into their health care bill a requirement that everybody has to buy medical insurance, which is gone now. But I think more people probably are going to be buying insurance now anyway. But yeah, that there is definitely a difference there. But I want to get into the censorship into this before we close out the show and everything. My thoughts on this is not just about a Gab. This is not just about Gab being shut down. It's not just about the right to a platform. What I talked about in the opener, the idea that your civil rights are being pitted against an identity group, and that's been what's been happening the whole time. Your civil rights have been pitted against women as an identity group for a couple of centuries now. And we've seen over those centuries, over a couple of centuries, your right to due process has been shredded. Just absolutely, it's left in ribbons right now. In terms of sexual misconduct accusations of any kind, anything from quote, street harassment and misogyny in the UK to out and out forcible rape. You get accused of any of that, and you are subject to you're subject to a system where you have less of a presumption of innocence, if any at all. You have a higher standard of evidence you actually have to prove your innocence, and you have a higher standard of evidence to do it. There's a lower standard of evidence for proving your guilt, and it's continually getting chipped away at. You don't have the right to all of the exculpatory evidence that you should have the right to present. And this is something that, like, for me, if I were going to go in and say, I get to decide what the court's going to do, I would say no evidence can be excluded as long as it was legally acquired. And the only stipulation being that illegally acquired evidence either can't be presented at all, or it can be presented, but the person who acquired it goes to jail for doing whatever it is they did to get it. And if it's an authority figure, if the cops lie to get your evidence, or if they illegally record you or something like that, the only thing that you should be able to do, I don't think there should be laws that prevent you from protecting yourself by recording yourself and your interactions with other people. And let the attorneys in court cases make the arguments. Argue that this evidence is irrelevant, or argue that this evidence doesn't prove what the other side is claiming it proves, and things like that. I think people are rational enough to analyze and draw rational conclusions based on a full presentation of evidence and arguments. But unfortunately, in our court system, feminists and other women's advocates that don't consider themselves to be feminists have fought long and hard to exclude certain types of potentially exculpatory evidence from court cases where men are accused, specifically men, of intimate partner and sexual violence. And I think if you can do that with an identity group, if you can take an identity group and say, this group's emotional state, their sense of security, their sense of embarrassment in terms of women, their sense of autonomy, not their actual autonomy, but their sense of autonomy, outweighs another group's actual civil rights. You end up in a situation where you pave the way for oppressive, dysfunctional law. And I don't think it's going to be necessarily different if the identity group is something other than women. And as much as I hate the conspiracy theories, and I find them useless at best and damaging to the discussion and the ability to analyze what's going on in our society at worst. And of course, obviously, they're dangerous to the people who are the target of the theory at worst, as we have seen recently. I also don't think that it is any better necessarily to say, well, since this identity group is targeted with this nasty conspiracy theory, and since there are evil people out there or extremely misguided people out there who are willing to engage in violence on the basis of this conspiracy theory, then we have to start giving up our civil rights to protect this group. It's just as bad as the idea that you have to give up your civil rights to protect women. It's just as bad as the idea that everyone in the country had to give up some of their civil rights to protect ourselves against another invasion. And the Patriot Act and all of the screwy things that ended up in that law. It's all very dysfunctional. We can't be silencing even stupid speech, even the dumbest, most irrational, ridiculous ideas should not be silenced in the name of protecting anybody. If it's not already illegal, like making a direct threat is already illegal. That's considered assault. If it's in person, I don't know. It's considered stalking and harassment under the Violence Against Women Act. If you do it online. So I mean, we don't really need to take another step to outlaw those things. So the idea of just shutting down all ideas rather than being aware that, hey, there's this really stupid idea out there, we might want to keep an eye on the people that have been perpetuating it. To me, that is exactly it's the opposite. Shutting it down is the opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like, I think that by shutting it down, you basically prevent anybody from being able to properly illuminate the ideas why it's a bad idea in the first place, right? Like, you might be able to, by challenging it, you might be able to change the minds of the people who hold those bad ideas to begin with. And
or at the very least, you can intervene when new people become exposed to those bad ideas, right?
That too. Yeah, exactly. But by shutting it down and preventing anybody from being able to talk about it ever, well, I mean, that's not going to do anything. It's not going to make the ideas go away.
You're not going to prevent people from talking either, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You're just going to drive the conversation underground.
And they will find ways
into a tighter echo chamber, and people will stumble on it, whether it's through a friend in real life or through just stumbling on a website, and they won't have the because it's all underground, because it's all sort of under the table. They won't have any people arguing against those ideas within that echo chamber. They'll, so I mean, and the people who are in there, and this is one of the criticisms that I gave to with regard to not Trump derangement syndrome. It was dubbed TAD, Trump anxiety disorder. What was going on there is, in my opinion, is you have a bunch of people of progressive leftist persuasion who believed the rhetoric before Trump was elected, that when he's a Nazi and when he's elected, it's going to be all fascism all the time. And Black people and Hispanics are going to be dying in the streets, and everything's just going to be horrible, and it's going to be World War III and the whole bit. Either he's going to bomb the Russians or he's too in bed with the Russians, who knows. And but pardon that noise. But at the same time, we're looking at them going into a social media space where they can mute or block anyone they disagree with. So they go into these social media spaces full of like-minded people who are all also panicking. They block all forms of dissent, and then they whip themselves up into a frenzy, into a hysteria. They just cycle upward on the hysteria scale through feeding each other's own biases and delusions. So do we really want white supremacists to exist in that kind of bubble that pushes them towards ever greater hysteria?
Well, considering that the social justice end of things has erupted into violence of multiple types in multiple areas as a result of their echo chamber, definitely not.
Yeah, exactly.
Because unlike social justice types, white supremacists know how to fire a gun. And we've seen how dangerous it is when you have an echo chamber, when you have a whether it's a full, Gab's not really an echo chamber. You can confront somebody. You're not going to get in trouble for getting into a heated argument with somebody on Gab like you will on Twitter. I get into some pretty heated arguments, but I have to be very careful what I say. Even if somebody calls me names, like I had somebody call me a cunt, and I called her an idiot in response, and I got suspended for responding to being called a cunt by calling someone an idiot. That didn't happen on Gab, right? I could call somebody names on Gab, and they could block me, but they couldn't get me suspended for responding to being called names by calling names back. But yeah, you have this phenomenon where people who get very wrapped up in their victim narrative, and they get very oversensitive, and they get stuck in a little echo chamber like that. They come out with Antifa, and I don't want to see the white supremacist version of Antifa ever. I don't want to see the Jew conspiracy theorist version of Antifa ever.
Yeah.
That idea terrifies me, because while those people might not, in my mind at least, in my view at least, they're not competent at political analysis. They get wrapped up in their victim narratives, and they get wrapped up in their conspiracy theories and everything, and they fail to understand how, in a lot of ways, how biology works. But they're very competent in other areas. And I think that would be one of them. So, the idea that we should be censoring everything because, somebody's talking about the Jew conspiracy, that is just insane.
Honestly, it would be less troubling to me if the censorship was not so one-sided. So we get the Proud Boys completely deleted off of media. They were a response to Antifa. That was Gavin McGinnis saying, okay, we need some guys who are willing to go to these rallies, and when Antifa comes at you with a freaking bike lock, we need some boys who are gonna be willing to swing.
Take it away from them.
Yeah, and so essentially it was like Proud Boys like their response to an organization that has been described by the U.S. government as domestic terrorists. And at the same time, Antifa does not get the grief that the Proud Boys do, that Stormfront does, even though I don't know that Stormfront's been held responsible for any kind of anything, in terms of real life acts of violence. It's just like, or the Daily Stormer rather. So like, we're looking at this situation. I don't even know how they're even, like, I haven't watched the coverage of what's his name, Soyak, the Seminole gentleman who sent the bombs.
Yeah, the guy who says he identifies as Seminole, but apparently he's not. Unless there's a bit of news out there that I haven't seen, he's exactly as Native American as
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren, yeah. Pocahontas. But
it's
maybe
like
less actually.
Anti-Jew. Yeah. He's anti-Jew and also anti-Trump, and it's like the media, the mainstream media, doesn't know what to do with that.
Well, you've got two guys. The guy that you mentioned first, identified as Seminole, he was the fake bomber. He's not a real bomber, but he plays one on TV. But no, gosh, I don't know why, but my head doesn't want to retain the name of the synagogue shooter.
Yeah, no, it's
like
I don't even say it, because that just adds to.
I literally am not. It just doesn't. I have read it probably 20 times, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. I keep reading about the details. The thing that really struck me, and I just I blubbered like a little kid watching E.T. again, reading about the medical staff that treated the shooter, that they were Jewish. He went to a hospital where much of the medical staff was Jewish, and they treated him with dignity and compassion, despite the fact, and at least one of them was from the neighborhood that he attacked. So they were from the community that he attacked. One of them at least was from the neighborhood that he attacked. And they upheld their Hippocratic oath, and they had the patience and the dignity and the integrity to just treat him as a medical patient and ignore the monstrous thing that he had just done. And I don't know if I could live up to that. 'Cause I'm not from... I have almost no connection at all to Pennsylvania, despite being, from the state next door. And I was so angry when I heard about this. Another incident. And I'm always... It's enraging when you hear about somebody attacking a place like a church or a school where people are supposed to feel safe. Every time it's enraging that somebody would dare to do something like this. And if it had been in my community, if it had been, a church that my neighbors went to, or a school that my kids or my neighbors' kids went to, it would be so hard for me to, at that moment, in that moment, remember that the perpetrator is a person, and that I was a medical professional. That would be probably my biggest struggle. And they did it. They all did it. They managed to, and I'm sure that it was, if not a pride thing, an identity thing for them as medical professionals, and probably also as Jews, with the humility of the Jews and the humility of the medical profession, treat this individual as a human being. Which was more than he had done for their folks. And I read that, and it just, that, you can't find something that'll tug on your heartstrings harder, That's integrity.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But sorry, I'm just thinking about it. It gets me. But the idea that this horrific incident is being exploited, the way that it's being exploited, that's enraging too. We have a situation where somebody with hatred in his heart decided that a class of people and their beliefs should not be allowed to exist. And in response, we have a class of people, not necessarily an identity group altogether, because I am seeing this from both sides, left, right. I'm seeing this from all areas of the authoritarian spectrum, deciding that a group of people and their ideas should not exist. And it's a broader group than they're admitting, because they're using it as an excuse to shut down platforms for not censoring politically incorrect speech that includes political dissent against government discrimination against a wide variety of people. And that's very dangerous. You have to have the ability to criticize your government. You have to have the ability to criticize the social order of things. You even have to have the ability to be wrong. Sometimes you have to be wrong for years before you are right. I supported the death penalty for years before I came to the conclusion that our government is not trustworthy enough to handle it, to be responsible for it, and that it is unacceptable for even one person to be wrongfully executed, ever. And
essentially,
it's bad enough to justify never executing anybody.
You maybe still agree with it in principle, but in practice, it's just too flawed.
Well, exactly. And then the other thing is, for me, it's a question of what are we achieving with it? Because we're not protecting ourselves. If we've already got somebody in a high security prison and they can't get out and commit their crimes again, what are we doing with it, right? So I was wrong on that for a good 20 years before the right information got to me, the right situation got to me. And I'm not going to get into that either, because if I talk about that, I will cry.
Right.
It was the death of an intellectually disabled man. And it was wrong. Even if he was guilty, it was still wrong. But I don't think he was. But anyway, you have the right to be wrong. You don't have the right to kill people because you're wrong. You don't have the right to harass people because you're wrong. But you have the right to be wrong. You have the right to be wrong out loud. You have the right to be wrong in public.
This is even important to be wrong.
This is one thing that I think we should have included in our final submissions in our court case, was what was etched in the glass on the when you went through security at the courthouse. You have the right to be wrong, but you do not have the right to do wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's even important to be wrong, because people who are wrong can learn from being wrong and can grow to be better people because of it, and they can have more nuanced perspectives in the world. I think the thought of somebody who is right all the time just strikes me as being a very small-minded person, ultimately.
What? How dare you talk about me that way?
Sorry, everyone except Karen.
Actually, I was wrong about the thing. I was conflating the two recent massacreists. So
there you go. And that allowed you to correct what you were saying.
Clubbed. Yeah.
Well, you can always say, I'm never mistaken. I'm never incorrect. I thought I was mistaken once, but I was wrong. That's your answer. Yeah, the thing about...
That's exactly what someone who likes puns would say.
Oh, of course.
You like dad jokes too, right?
Yes, I do. And it's, especially when they come from my dad. My dad has the best dad jokes. But in any case, this is a very valuable thing. I don't think people realize, because we sit in school as students, right? And we have teachers spoon feed us things like I before E except after C, and other ideas like that. And we write stuff down, and we memorize things, and we vomit it back up onto a test paper later on, through our pencils and pens. When we learn to talk, we don't have that. When we learn to walk, we don't have that. When we learn to watch where we're going as we get taller, because we run headfirst into the bottom of the coffee table and end up almost needing stitches. We're not getting spoon-fed that stuff, right? When we learn that gravity works, we don't learn it first in a classroom. We learn it by falling down. And that's discovery learning. We learn by testing things and trying things and examining things. You are an expert at analysis at birth. At simple analysis.
Oh, yeah.
What will happen if I do this? Boom. Well, hey, I fell down. That's what happens if I do this. What if I change this? What if I change that? And it's natural.
Yeah, we know that babies don't just learn by observation because babies crawl. Most babies crawl before they walk, and they don't see adults crawling around.
Right.
On all fours. That's not something that they observe in their environment. And then you look at some babies who come up with ingenious ways of getting around before they can walk, like bum shufflers.
Rollers.
Yeah, that don't crawl. They just like sit up and use their feet to scooch their butts across the floor. They come up with ingenious ways of getting around that they don't observe adults doing. And so, yeah, we know that babies actually learn through experimentation and trial and error. So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and this is the way people learn a lot of things. Even with cooking, you could become adept at cooking. You can become competent at cooking by learning how to follow a recipe. But you learn to become excellent. You learn to become an expert. You learn to become a chef by experiencing the flavors and the scents and the visual presentation and the responses of the people who eat what you have prepared. And you can't learn that from just having somebody describe it to you. You have to do it. And you have to experience it, and you have to have trial and error, and you have to say, you know what, maybe I don't like 2 tablespoons of cinnamon in my chili soup. Maybe some people really like that, but I don't. Maybe my family doesn't like that, so I'm not going to cook that for my family. And you might learn that, hey, this basic recipe is a good place to start, but I want these ingredients added because they're better. Or I want to do it this way because it results in a more tender meat, or it results in a better savory flavor. This combination is more flavorful.
Or as my old boss at the Chinese place said, nutmeg.
Yeah.
Nutmeg. What makes your prime rib so good? Nutmeg. What do you put on it? Salt, pepper, and nutmeg.
Yep. And
very weird.
These are things, like, you have this with every idea. And every so often a detail will come along that you weren't expecting. Like with me, and the death penalty, and realizing that there is no point to it other than revenge. And what good is revenge? Revenge really has no value when you're enacting it in this manner. So in order to learn, in order to hone your ideas, in order for people to have the opportunity to get to the point of being right on things that we trip ourselves up on like that, you have to be wrong first. You have to be able to be wrong, and you have to have social tolerance and legal tolerance for people getting to right by going through wrong on the way. There is that, and then there is also the fact that our government isn't always right. Social attitudes, prevailing social attitudes, are clearly not always right. In the United States, we have a history of being catastrophically wrong on some very important things. How we relate to each other as human beings across boundaries of racial differences and religious differences. That's that way all over the world. Tribalism has existed everywhere. And we have had some massive growing pains in the short time that we have been a country in those areas. We had to get through wrong before we learned to be right. We had to get through Dred Scott before we had emancipation. So the idea that we can just shut down ideas and they'll go away is stupid. And the idea that ideas that are wrong can't be allowed to exist is also stupid. The idea that we can't allow them to be expressed and hashed out, or even just expressed and have other people, discuss them and ridicule them if they're bad, and prevent them from spreading too much if they're bad. It's stupid that we cannot do these things.
Well, I think too, you have to look at the idea that a lot of people have that it's the Streisand effect, but the Streisand effect is essentially a function of human nature. It is, we want to know the unknowable, or we want to know the taboo. We want to know that. And so the more you suppress something, often the more people seek it out and the more people want to know about it. So you literally have situations in highly sexually repressive cultures where sexual titillation is just like off the freaking charts, right? You see a woman's wrists and you're springing a boner because you're not getting rid of the impulse. You're trying to suppress it through artificial means, and that just makes it all the more intriguing and interesting and all of that stuff, right? And I think that because among young people in particular, there is a desire to depart from the older ways. There is always a rebellious aspect to the new generation, whatever that generation is. A kind of inclination to say, your ideas are stupid, and then generally over the course of history, they've gone off and done their rebellious thing and come back and said, oh, Mom, Dad, you were right. But given the atmosphere these days where you can get roped into anything from religious cults to feminism, to social justice warriorism, to anti-Semitism, to anti-Trumpism, to Trumpism, to the alt-right, to all of these extremes, right? I think I think it's kind of reflected in the fact that so many of the young people mostly young men who have committed terrorist acts in the name of Islam over the last 10, 15 years have been, they've been second generation citizens of the countries that they were in. They were radicalized because they were looking for something that their parents weren't offering them. They often came from moderate parents. So essentially what you're looking at is once you drive everything underground, once you drive everything under the table, you have young people who are looking for something that is against the establishment or against the common wisdom, or some way to be punk rock. Essentially, you will have a segment of young people who are very, very, very much interested in that, interested in throwing away the old. And what they're finding is things that are not mainstream within their culture, but have this strange hint of, traditional values. Islam is, 1600 years old. Anti-Semitism is older than that. So you're looking at a way to radicalize young people when all of this goes on out of sight. And you're looking at young people, a significant portion of whom are actually interested in being radicalized. So,
yeah, my punk rock was Wicca. Raised in a conservative Christian household, so I had to be a witch. Yeah. So I understand what you're talking about is, and it's interesting because a lot of kids do that, and then in their 30s or 40s they start coming back around to their parents' values, and hey, mom, dad, you were right about this. I really don't like admitting that you were right, but
you were right.
Yeah, but you were right. And in the meantime, they go through these bad ideas, and they go through some of them. Some of them they'll retain. There are things I retained from being a part of the neo-pagan community that were valuable, and I will always value those. Hell, I could not accept and identify my own sexuality until I became part of the neo-pagan movement, community. So there is that. But in any case, this is something that, once again, that ability to learn through discovery, to analyze, to basically put yourself through sort of the school of what's happening now. You had the old Soupy Sales show. He used to do a sketch on the Church of What's Happening Now, and it was always, the Church of What's Happening Now does things that are popular and fun and maybe not necessarily the best idea, as opposed to if I remember right, and I've only seen this in like one or two, it wasn't shows that were played, but discussions about the Soupy Sales show. But the idea basically was that it was the fashionable church, and I think a lot of people do that. They go through the school of what's happening now. This is what's in fashion. I'm going to identify with it. This is what's different than my parents taught me, so I'm going to identify with it. And they go through and they pick things up from that, and they analyze it, and they pick things to keep, and they pick things to drop, and they move on, and they a lot of times do come back around to their parental teachings and values. At least if they're tried and true. I think a lot of people reject dysfunction that their parents engaged in as well.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go on with some super chats here, and we did have to say goodbye to Prim. She had a thing come up that I don't know what it was, but in any case, she had to take off. So it's just me and Karen from here on out, which won't be very long. We're getting close to the end of the show here. But Frank Tomeo gave us $2 Canadian and said, "Nothing froths at the mouth like a feminist." And although if you eat Alka-Seltzer, you will. Miles Kinslow gave us $20 and said, "Hey guys, thoughts on Candace Owens' Blexit and its effects on identity politics?" It's too new to tell, but the fact that there is a large outspoken group, I'm tired, you can tell. I had 3 hours of sleep today. A large outspoken group within the black population that is saying, you know what, you cannot tell us that we have to be of a particular political affiliation, and we're doing this instead, and is making it acceptable publicly for black people to make their own political choices rather than have a tradition and a consensus tell them that they have to agree with a particular political party. That's a good thing. Where they take it is going to be up to that group in particular. And like I said earlier on Candace Owens, she has shown some integrity in her more recent activities, and in particular her apology to Kanye West. So I have hope for that. I have quite a bit of hope for that, and I think it's going to make a difference in whether or not it's going to be like the Not Your Shield of left-wing, right-wing politics. I don't know how effective or ineffective it's going to be, and I won't know that until we see how big it gets, how long it lasts, and what happens with it. But I definitely have hope for it. And then, Karen, did you have any thoughts on it?
No, she doesn't. Oh my God. Anyhow, so the Candace Owens Blexit thing, I think that essentially it is a waking up, and I think maybe it will become sort of the idea that sort of the embracing of Jordan Petersonism in terms of, this is my life. I take responsibility for it. I'm going to do what I can to be excellent and to contribute to my community and take on voluntarily take on responsibility for myself and others and all of those things, right? I think that there is the potential for that to actually go into communities that have been sort of sold this bill of goods that everyone's against you and there's no way for you to succeed, and the odds are stacked, and white people will always have it better, and all of this other stuff, right? So I'm hoping that I don't necessarily trust Candace Owens. It really was a really fucked up idea that she had for that doxing site. And I do think that, maybe she was, Kanye accused her of sort of using him for political purposes. And I think that that's probably what she did. Not that people don't do that, lots of people. But I think that there really needs to be an awakening in certain communities in the United States in terms of their own agency and their own ability to improve their lot in life and improve the lives of their people in their communities and all of that stuff. And I think that I'm really hoping that the 12 rules for life model gets adopted by more and more people, because there's really no, I mean, you can say it's a pie in the sky pipe dream, things aren't that simple, whatever, but there's nothing damaging about following those rules. There's nothing that's going to harm you about following those rules. It may not pay off the way, it may not be like a guarantee, but it certainly isn't going to do you any harm to do that and to take responsibility to try to achieve, to try and be the best you. And so I think that, if Candace Owens is part of that and Blexit is part of that, I'd really love to see them come off what they call it, the Democratic plantation. Yeah. Stop being pawns, start thinking for themselves, even if they want to keep voting Democrat, stop being an NPC, and actually decide that for yourself, right?
Yeah, I'm always happy to see people thinking for themselves. The one thing that I would be worried about is if they get caught up in right-wing identity politics, because they exist as well, and hopefully they don't trade one plantation for another. Although it's a little harder to make the right wing a plantation, it can happen, and so it's definitely going to be a movement to watch, and it's definitely, at this point at least, it's something to support. As long as they're not telling people how they have to think, and telling people, you can't do this if you're black, you can't do that if you're black, then it's definitely a movement to support.
Agreed.
Then we have General Jack Ripper. Okay, scary. General Jack Ripper, not Jack the Ripper, gave us $10 and said, "Finally managed to catch a live stream and cannot force Alison to read anything. I'm going to send her this and tell her she has to read it on the next thing she does on air." Then last but not least, French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, "I before E except after C has more exceptions than cases where it applies." Yeah, it does, and that's one of the things. It has so many exceptions.
No. It has few exceptions. Maybe in French.
Yeah, it has a lot of exceptions. But it's still funny because we get taught that and we memorize it, and then we come across words where there are exceptions, and we spell them wrong. But in any case, is there?
There aren't that many exceptions.
Is there any final thought on the topic?
Oh, geez, final thought. This is too big a freaking thing for me to encapsulate in a 30-second final thought. I think honestly, I would say that scapegoating is really problematic. Even when I talk about feminism, and people might accuse me of scapegoating feminism, but no, I criticize traditionalism. I criticize conservatives. I criticize feminism. Primarily feminism, because feminism is the one right in front of my face right now. Behind them are these other things. But I don't scapegoat them. I don't put words in their mouths. I don't infer what they mean by what they say. I essentially go by what they say. And I would have to say that equating, and these are feminist writers who are bestsellers, who are well respected within the community, who are in positions of, they're professors, they're the heads of lobby groups and all of this other stuff, right? They're highly accomplished people at the top of their totem pole, so to speak. And so I don't go after the random. I allow the existence of coffee shop feminists who only believe in equality and think that's what a feminist means. I allow for that. I allow for the idea that some people buy into the ideology because it's been misrepresented to them, right? So I mean, I'm looking at my, I guess you would call, arch nemesis in a realistic way, that it's made up of. It's not a conspiracy theory. I think most of it has to do with human nature. It doesn't require a conspiracy. Like I said, it's all out in the open. So when I see these sort of ideas of vast global conspiracies, of a certain group of people that, somehow it's all kept mum, it's all kept quiet, and nobody's actually blabbed. I'm just not buying it. I'm just not buying it as it's just scapegoating. That's all it is.
Yeah, even the funding that feminism gets is no secret. You can actually, Capital Research Center has a whole book on that. You can go back and trace, which organizations, and like feminist organizations get quite a bit of money from a lot of banks and things like that. A lot of businesses that they can go in and say, hey, do you support women? Because we need some money if you support women, and they've got that narrative, and they can get that money, and they do that with a lot of organizations that need the PR. And it's not so much a conspiracy among these organizations to fund feminism as it is a combination of guilt tripping and
trying to fit in,
misconception, exploitation. Women are oppressed, we've got to help these poor oppressed women, and things like that. But the funding is there, and it's traceable. It's not hidden. It's not secret. It's not behind closed doors. It's there's no secret knock to get the money. It's right out in the open. Hey, do you support women? We need some money if you support women. That's the way it is.
Yeah. Whereas the patriarchy, that's all backroom deals and off the record, and
good old boys networks
reporting, and it's all just a bunch of secret handshakes and mysterious woo, right? And all of that, right? So it's like, I don't know that there has been a patriarchy out there that has essentially said we want to oppress women, or, we want to subjugate women.
Yeah.
There are patriarchies out there that say men and women have different roles. But even Islam says that both men and women are of equal value in the eyes of God.
Yep.
So.
And then in terms of feminists, well, we do criticize feminism very, very vehemently, quite a bit.
Yeah, but we don't
if I encountered a group of feminists that was helping to lobby for equally shared parenting, which I have in the past, I would be happy to work with them on that.
Mm-hmm.
Get that through. Sign petitions that feminists have promoted that were initiated by men's rights activists to reform UK law to include all forms of potentially reproductive sex under the definition of rape, because right now, if the perpetrator is female and the victim is male, it's not defined as a rape. So, it doesn't matter whether someone's feminist or not in terms of promoting a solution to a problem, as long as the solution that they're promoting is a right solution. I don't care about the ideology, I care about the solution. But I'm still going to criticize the ideology in and of itself, because most of the time, when they propose a problem and a solution, it's that wrongful victim narrative, and the victim narrative is used to justify infringement on men's civil rights. We have another super chat. Fringe Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, except after C rule only represents 25% of the words to which it could apply. 75% are exceptions. We did have...
I want to see some data on that, French Honey Badger.
Okay, so now you have homework. You have to send Karen data. I think somebody mentioned there's another rhyme that goes at the end of that. I always just learned I before E except after C, but then somebody came along later and added except or when sounding like A as in neighbor or way. So if you include that, then the rule starts applying to more words. So if you just say I before E except after C, then it doesn't. But in any case, and then there's that exception was written in there to deal with all of those exceptions, that extra rule there. And with that, now that we've had our grammar lesson and our free speech lesson, we got all kinds of speech tonight. It's after 9 o'clock. We've been on for over 2 hours. So we have an incredibly long sausage tonight.
So long, adieu. I hate to say goodbye.
So you got to start with me singing and end with Karen singing. So
thank
everybody for listening. Thanks to my wonderful co-hosts who have had such great contributions tonight. I'm sorry Prim had to leave early. And thanks to everybody who makes Badger Talk, makes HBR Talk happen. Remember, everybody, like and share, particularly on the Honey Badger live streams channel, because the stream is going to go away on the Honey Badger radio channel. And good night.